All right, everybody. I'd like to welcome Carrie Geist to the show. He's chief engineer at KLH. So, hey, welcome, Carrie. How are you?
Doing great. How are you doing, Giles?
Oh, I'm doing well. When I was thinking about this conversation that we were going to have, it kind of took me back a little bit to my childhood. I don't. I guess it's my teens, maybe. I don't know if you'd call that my childhood, but I used to have the set of KLH gear, and it was just the best thing ever. So, just thinking about the brand just brings this feeling of nostalgia to me. And I think there are probably a lot of people out there that feel the same way. But, I think what's important for everybody to know is that KLH doesn't only have to bring that feeling of nostalgia. I mean, you guys are a force to be reckoned with today. And from
Right.
what I understand, you're a pretty big part of, the makeup of KLH today and kind of the products that you have in the direction of the company. Maybe you could take a minute to introduce yourself to everybody that's watching and tell us what you do for KLH.
Well, as you said, I'm the chief engineer for KLH. I'm basically in charge of engineering and product development. So, kind of the product development, I'm responsible for basically putting together the product plans, setting the budget, setting the schedules, basically outlining the products that we're going to do in the future. And then, of course, on the engineering side of things, I work with the people that we have on staff or our suppliers to work out, of course, execute the design of the product, if you will.
Right.
Um, so it's a really fun job. I've been in audio for 35 years now, and I've always worked
Oh,
in
well, that's a great tenure.
engineering. I've always worked in engineering or product related roles during that entire time. And it's just, it's a lot of fun.
Right on. Now, you came on with KLH a few years ago, right?
Yeah, about 2 years ago. Yes.
Okay, right on. And in that time, I know that you guys have introduced one new product that has made
Mhm.
quite a stir out in the market. And I've heard a lot of people talk about it and a lot of excitement about it. Maybe you could introduce that to everybody and tell people what it's all about.
Well, it's about a little over a month ago, KLH introduced a product called the Model 5, which is um, uh, a new version of a product KLH originally introduced back in 1968.
Oh, wow.
And uh, back, KLH was founded in the late 50s and of course, and it was founded by Henry Close, which I'm sure you're familiar with that name.
Absolutely.
Um, but the company really had its heyday throughout the 1960s and was well known for building acoustic suspension type loudspeakers,
And
which were
for
very,
folks that aren't in the know, that's a sealed box.
yes, that is
Right.
correct, as opposed to, say, maybe a bass reflex enclosure, which is largely popular today. Acoustic suspension is a really a kind of a version of a sealed box loudspeaker. But that type of loudspeaker design was very popular in the late 50s and throughout the 60s, and was still popular even through the 70s. So it was kind of once we got into the 80s or so that it kind of fell out of favor. Um, and really, bass reflex type enclosures more or less became all the rage. But it's really a very viable technology in a lot of ways. It has several advantages over bass reflex enclosures. I think particularly given the fact that just over the decades, every decades, uh, music seems to get better and better. You know,
It
every
really
10 years
does.
or so.
It's crazy and also wonderful the way that technology has allowed people to really elevate, not only the process of creating music, but also of recording it, producing it, and
Exactly.
then listening to it.
So, and I just really feel, in the last 15 or 20 years particularly, the quality of the recordings have just come such a long way and have gotten so much better. And just the uh, uh, percentage of people that are just getting it right today as opposed to not right is
Right.
just even continues to get better, right? Uh, and I feel because of that, acoustic suspension has a place in all of that because technically speaking, acoustic suspension is a more accurate solution. I mean, it's really the only one that can take an input signal and actually recreate it properly. A bass reflex, for a variety of reasons, is compromised in a few ways in the really extreme low bass section. And that's where recording engineers seem to be getting it right today.
Right.
And that's why I kind of feel those designs have become somewhat compromised, is just simply because the recordings have somewhat matured, kind of well past their capability, so to speak, or what they really seem to do well.
Right.
Uh,
Well, let's
so
talk about that for just a second then. Let's dig
okay,
into acoustic suspension versus bass reflex. And I'm far from a speaker designer or a physicist as far as sound engineering goes. But so in a bass reflex environment, you have typically some type of device that's a port or a passive radiator, right? Something where
yes,
an air column
mhm,
can vibrate or a membrane vibrates, right? And it
exactly,
seems like the primary use for that is for additional output, correct? So people
yes,
are
that's
looking to really
absolutely right.
shore up the low end. However, once you hit that port tuning and frequency drops below that, a number of things happen, right? So you start losing control of the cone because you don't have any kind of air cushion to help control that, right? So I think they call that unloading underneath port tuning or something like that.
Yep.
But then also, don't you get into phase coherency issues as you move below port tuning as well? So your phase alignment
Yes, you do.
becomes
There's timing
smeared,
issues.
right?
There's timing issues. When you stop and think about it, there's a finite amount of time that it takes a signal to propagate from the active driver through the enclosure and out the port or passive radiator. And that also requires a certain amount of time. So there's always this kind of buildup, and there's also a time for it to settle down because it doesn't react instantaneously. By the way, you understand this is better as well or better than I do, by the way. But
You'll have my application tomorrow.
I was going to say, you want a job? But yeah, a bass reflex enclosure, it's fine, typically down to the tuning frequency of the loudspeaker, which on average for your typical floor standing loudspeakers probably are, usually around 40 hertz.
Mhm, that makes sense.
And
And for folks that
and
don't know, 40 hertz is about 1 octave above what's typically considered kind of the
yep,
limit of human hearing, and below that, you get, what do they call it? Infrasonic sound that you can feel, and there's vibration, but
yes,
there's about an octave of sound there.
right. And to your point, below that frequency, bass reflex enclosures, basically begin to unload. The port isn't really serving any function anymore other than the fact it provides a hole in the box.
Correct.
So
Right.
there's really no air spring or any type of governor that's placed on the loudspeaker transducer itself. So it has in a manner, it kind of becomes unstable, if you will, at those frequencies.
Right.
And that's a kind of, yeah. So that's exactly just kind of the point that I just try to make when I talk to people about that is it's that area which is kind of becomes troublesome in terms of accuracy um, and just base textures and kind of like you alluded to, timing issues and things like that. They all get out of whack. And uh, uh, and while acoustic suspension may not be able to deliver the same level of output that a bass reflex enclosure does, the output that you do get is going to be much better and more accurate, uh,
Mhm.
just simply because it's not compromised in the same way that a bass reflex enclosure is.
Yeah, and I think where the rubber meets the road for a lot of people too is, and I think people really consider, the seal versus ported, to just to use the vernacular, um,
Right.
it really from a loudness. They want as much output as they can get,
Yep.
and
Completely
the
understandable.
the quality kind of takes a back seat. And people, I think, most often will see this when they're dealing with subwoofers, and like, oh, I'm going to port tune down to 19 hertz, and but then they'll hit that sub with a 10 hertz tone with 2,000 watts, and it goes bam. It's
Right.
done. It's just kills it. um
Right.
so yeah, I mean, you got to be really, really careful when you do that, but it's exciting for me to see sealed enclosures, because I really love acoustic suspension. It's my favorite way to go. And you
Right. Mhm.
absolutely lose out on some of that low end output. However, I think the sound quality more than makes up for that. And if you are missing out on that volume, there are other ways that you can deal with getting back those decibels, right? It might
Yes,
cost you a little
absolutely.
bit more in amplification, right? You might need
Sure.
to
Yep.
dump double the power to get 3 more decibels out of your speakers on the low end. But to me, eliminating the potential issues with drivers unloading under port tuning, and then particularly the phase coherency issues that go away, it makes tuning your system, I mean, infinitely easier, right? and
Right. Yep.
and if you're a critical listener, I don't know that going with a based reflex system really is the right way to go. So yeah, hearing that the Model 5 is acoustic suspension, and it runs, it's a three-way design with a 10,
Yes,
a
that's
tweeter,
correct.
and a mid-range.
Yes, that's correct. Uh-huh.
Right on. Yeah, that's super exciting, because that, in for most musical listening tastes, that will give you as much of a full range as you need. It'll be
Mhm.
phase coherent, so the impulse will be the same for the most part. I mean, sure, I'm sure there's tiny stuff going on, but not as much as crazy kind of ported at 40 hertz, and then everything underneath that goes just nuts. So yeah, that's
Right.
that's exciting. I'm really happy to hear that you guys have that product out there, and I'm looking forward to listening to that one of these days. That's cool.
Yeah. So just real quick, one of the other advantages is the rate of attenuation in acoustic suspension sealed box um, attenuates below the cutoff frequency of the loudspeaker. It's a much shallower cutoff for a closed box. In engineering terms, bass reflex enclosures roll off about 24 dB per octave. So
Okay,
you're
sure.
talking about
That's super sharp.
24.
That's like
Yeah.
this. Yeah,
All right. So if they cut off at 40 hertz, you're down 24 dB at 20 hertz, which is, you're
it's
almost
gone.
turned off at that point.
Yeah, it's gone.
Whereas a sealed enclosure rolls off at 12 dB per octave. So at 20 hertz, you'd only be down, say, approximately 12 dB or so. Uh, but where that really becomes important is in flexibility of room placement. Since you don't have that kind of turn on, kind of turn off characteristic you have in a bass reflex, where it's a shallower roll off with the sealed box, your room modes in your listening room uh, with a bass reflex, you kind of either get these room modes reinforce the output of the bass reflex enclosure above 40 hertz, or
Right.
they reinforce frequencies below 40 hertz that aren't there. So you kind of either get this really loud, kind of punchy um, characteristic, or you don't really get a lot of help at all because the loudspeaker is basically turned off. Sealed box doesn't quite behave in that manner.
That makes a lot of
And
sense, totally.
there's a little bit more seamless. It's not perfect, of course, but it's much better than the bass reflex enclosure.
Oh, that's great. Um, moving outside, I guess, of the technical aspects of the
Hmm.
speaker, and it's a passive speaker, three-way internal crossover.
Yep.
Um, uh, the aesthetics of the speaker are cool, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So if if you think of a speaker that is like that classic kind of aggressive look. I mean, this is the one, right? So, it's kind of wider.
Right.
It's not like the tall, skinny towers that you see in most places for home theater kind of stuff or television listening
Right.
today. This is the wider, a little bit shorter, and you guys have these some type of metal stands, right? It looks like
Right.
tube metal and brings them up what 8 inches, 9 inches, something like that, and gives them a little bit of
I
tilt.
think I think it's about 8 inches off the floor, and I think the slant back is about 5 degrees. Yeah,
Yeah, and
but that's just
super
yeah,
cool.
right. So the stands do ship with the product.
Okay.
Uh,
Oh, even
uh,
better.
yeah, so they come in the carton. Felt that that's the only way. That wasn't how it was done back in the day, but for proper
Sure.
stereo listening today, you have to set up the speakers in a fashion that are going to optimize the speakers for imaging. So we
Absolutely.
decided very early. Yeah, we decided very early that that was absolutely the right thing to do, and I think that's proved itself since we've introduced the product.
Now that helps get the tweeters on axis with your ears to some degree, right? 5
Yeah,
degrees.
yeah,
Cool. So
yeah. Uh
while you're talking, I'm gonna pull this up on screen so people can kinda see what's going on. So go ahead and continue,
Okay.
and I'll pull this up.
Well, I was just going to say the loudspeaker has a relatively, uh, like you were saying, it's not as tall as a typical floor standing tower speaker. I think on the stand, uh, I think the height of the loudspeaker is around 34 or 35 inches. And then we angled the stand back, of course, to bring the tweeter axis, uh, uh, bring it up to ear level when you're at the typical listening position,
Right.
right? So, and regardless whether you're really standing or listening, you're kind of still in that, you know, plus or minus 10-degree arc above or below the axis of the tweeter, which is where you kind of want to be for proper stereo listening.
Yeah, look at the stand I've got up on the screen, everybody. That's just so classic to me, and maybe it wasn't the way it was done before, but that just I don't know, just look at the way this thing looks. It's just so cool. And then the the grills are made out of linen. Is that right? Do you,
Yes, that's correct.
yeah, looks great.
So we weren't really trying to necessarily copy the original Model 5 that was launched in 1968. We were really more or less looking at it of, how would, say, Henry Close and KLH, envision a product like the Model 5 today? And so of
Right.
course you get to, well, you would add the stands, for example. And of course, we get to take advantage of all the technology and everything that we've learned about acoustics the last 50 plus years.
The Model 5 is spectacular. I love the look. I like the tradition and the legacy of the speaker and how you guys have kind of rebuilt it from the ground up
Right.
as new. But I guess one more question about that one before we move on. On the back on the input, it looks like you've got um, your five-way binding posts that you can use banana
Yep.
plugs with or spades, whatever. But is there like a little knob above that or something? I,
Yep.
I couldn't really tell what that was.
Right. Well, the original product, going back to the original product, it had basically attenuation controls on the product to control mid-range and tweeter levels. Of course, you used to see that feature on a lot of products
Right.
back then. Of course, you see it on the new L100 even today. I've never been a big fan of attenuator controls on loudspeakers, just simply because basically what you're doing with the control is changing the voicing of the product, right? And
Okay.
that isn't necessarily what you wanted to do. At the same time, we wanted to keep that feature with the product, just simply because it was a characteristics of the original design, and we kind of wanted to carry that forward. So we really kind of changed the idea or the purpose of that control a little bit, um, and how we intend people to use it. And it basically comes down to this. Well, there are two different sound fields in a listening room. And there's one that everyone is familiar with, and that is when you're setting up a pair of loudspeakers for the first time. It's usually always recommended that you move the loudspeaker around the listening room a little bit in order to get the best bass response from the
Right.
loudspeaker. Everybody's kind of is familiar with that to some extent, anyway. And that effect usually takes place below about 300 or 400 hertz. 300 or 400 hertz is kind of in that low mid-range area and below. And that's where a loudspeaker's position relative to the boundaries or walls of the room really have an effect on how the loudspeaker sounds.
Right.
Okay, well, everything above 400 hertz, for example, moving the loudspeaker really doesn't have that much of effect. It has some effect, but it's really not that much. What really has more of an effect is just simply the liveness or deadness of the listening room. In other
Sure.
words, if you have a lot of flat, hard surfaces in the listening room, say for example, a tile floor or a hardwood floor is a good example, the room tends to be much brighter. I think people can kind of understand that. Whereas if you have wall-to-wall carpeting or a lot of plush furniture or irregular surfaces on the wall, that tends to lean towards a more dead space.
Sure.
And the thing about it is what's funny is, people can spend thousands of dollars on audio equipment, loudspeakers and everything, but it's always surprising to me how they pay very little attention to actually what's going on in the listening room. They don't really treat it in terms of any type of room treatment material or anything like that to kind of control the liveness. And what tends to happen is they just kind of tend to put all this expensive audio equipment into these listening rooms, and they just kind of deal with it.
Right. And the sound just bounces around.
Yeah, I mean, live rooms can be very problematic. And if you really kind of stop and think about it for a few minutes, really the the movement in a lot of home interior designs tends to be, for reasons I don't necessarily understand, but for harder,
Right.
more,
Lots of glass.
lots of glass, lots of hardwood floors. Uh, a lot of people may use an area carpet, but believe me, area carpets do not do the same as a full carpet, for example, with a
Right.
pad, for
Right.
example. So I tend to think, so I do tend to think that listening spaces maybe tend to be more bright, maybe than they were 20 or 30 years ago.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I think simply because of that, what I was saying about people not really investing in room treatment material or anything like that, we really kind of reimagined how that attenuator switch worked. And it wasn't so much to control the voicing of the loudspeakers when you're literally turning up and down your mid-range, almost on and off, more than just basically taking out some energy out of the room. So for a really bright listening space, you have some option or see some tool available to you that you can take a little more energy out of the listening space and give it a little bit better sound. It doesn't correct for a bad room, but it can make a room that may be on the borderline tolerable, for example.
Right. It just takes the edge off, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
So
it's a three.
if you ran a frequency sweep and you're kind of high, maybe on I'm trying on this end, this will
Mhm.
just pull it down a little bit, right?
Exactly. So it's a three-position switch. Basically, it's a 0 dB setting, a default setting, which is it's a high setting. Is basically a flat response, and then you have a selection of minus 1.5 dB and minus 3 dB. And believe it or not, if you're listening to the loudspeaker and you switch from 0 dB to minus 1.5 dB, you won't even notice that there's a difference really.
That's very, very, very minor. Yeah.
Right. And mostly because really 400 hertz, for all practical purposes, is really above the fundamentals of most music instruments and even vocals for that matter. So you're
Right.
really into the harmonics that you're really affecting at that point, and not so much the fundamentals, which are mainly dominant below 400 hertz or so. So we just kind of felt that that was just kind of a neat way or a novel way to kind of use that feature and still kind of incorporate it in the loudspeaker, but incorporate it in a different way that I think would be for helpful for people that don't most people don't necessarily have special listening rooms to set up
Right. Yeah.
to
They'll buy some speakers and they'll have a record player and a preamp and amp and they'll put it in their living room and the room is what the room is, right? And they're not going to go spend
exactly.
$5,000 on diffusion and absorption or whatever else they're looking for, bass traps to kind of shore that up. They just
Exactly.
have what they have. No, that makes sense. And I agree 100%. So, when people come to me and they say, well, I want to improve my listening experience. I want to improve my sound. What should I buy? What gear should I purchase to improve or change my sound? And, I say, well, the thing that will likely impact your sound the most is the speaker. But beyond that, and some people would even argue with me about this, is the room itself, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
before you go and spend a lot of money on fancy smancy XYZ equipment, um, you know, look at the room,
Yep.
and see what you can do there. And, if you, in most cases, it's deadening up the room a little bit or getting rid of reflections, at least at the major reflection points will, create a much better stereo image, better sound stage, the whole deal. It'll just be so much better. You get better phase coherency. You don't have all the sound bouncing around and smearing and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm glad that you guys have taken that into consideration. And for folks that are not able to do that, at least they have some type of way to take the edge off of that bright hot room and cool it
Exactly.
down a little bit. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
It sounds like an outstanding set of speakers. I hope to hear them soon. Are you guys going to be doing any shows this year by any chance? Do you know if you'll do like Rocky
Uh,
Mountain Audio Fest or
I'm not sure
Expona?
about Rocky Mountain Audio Fest. I know we're doing, of course, CEDIA, which CEDIA happens to be in Indianapolis this year. So
Right.
we're
And I'll be there. So I'll be looking for you guys.
okay. Yeah. So we're planning to be on the floor there. But I don't know what our plans are for Rocky Mountain at this point. Hopefully we'll be there, but I can't say at this point.
Right. Well, no, CD is great because that's obviously the name of my show is Home Theater Fanatics. So,
Right.
I love home theater, and CD really plays directly into that aspect of sound and video, AV and hi-fi and that kind of stuff. And Rocky Mountain, Exponent are primarily more 2-channel type shows.
Right.
So yeah, I'll be excited to see you guys there. Now, speaking of the home theater piece, so you guys don't just make these cool stereo speakers. You make full kits for people that want to have a multi-channel system, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So let me
So,
see. I'm going to pull this up while you're talking a little bit. Maybe you can introduce those product lines.
okay. Well, when Dave Kelly bought the brand, I think it was in 2017. One of the first product lines that he designed. This is really before I even entered the equation, but he came out with a family of products for home theater applications as well as 2-channel, I might add. But we have it's a relatively small product family. This is composed of a couple of floor standing products, a bookshelf, center channel surround, and a couple of woofers. The one that you're showing now is the Kindle, which is a very well reviewed product. It's a dual 6.5-inch tower speaker, 3-way. It has a genuine wood veneer.
Oh, that's the real deal, huh?
Yeah, that is a genuine wood veneer, cast frames, I might add. A very nice base
I like the feet on that. That's very classy.
with a nice spike kit that comes with
Yeah.
the product. And here's the kind of the cool thing about it is you get a pair of Kindles retails $1,300.
That
Um,
is a very aggressive price point for that much
right,
speaker.
exactly. So it's that speaker's been very well reviewed. It's been in production now for a couple of years, a little over a couple of years, I guess, but it's done really well for us. So that's been a very good product for us. A lot of good feedback on that one. But of course, you also have a dedicated center and dedicated surround. You're looking at the Concord.
Right. And this is the entry level model.
That is the entry level floor standing, if you will. Yes.
Right. Gotcha.
So, and it's kind of the neat thing about it is it's basically the size of the Kindle, but rather than the traditional way of just making kind of smaller and smaller floor standing loudspeakers, it's essentially the same size as the Kindle. But what we've done there is instead of a three-way system, it's a two-way system now. It uses basically similar 6.5-inch drivers, but in a two-way configuration. So you lose the mid-range, and of course the complexity of the passive crossover.
Right.
And at the
Now,
same time,
on this speaker, you guys are doing, so it's got the two 6.5s, and
well, they both play all the way down.
oh,
One
they
of them,
stop on the way up.
they stop on the way up. Yes. Generally speaking, as you go higher in frequencies, you really want things to originate from the same place as much as possible. And once you move up on frequencies, you can just see here you have three drivers that may have output that are kind of all combining. So when you talk about 2.5 way, really what you're just talking about is just kind of getting one out of the way early. So the crossover integrity is handled only by one 6.5 driver instead of two crossing over to the 1-inch tweeter.
Okay. That,
So
yeah, that really succinctly, explains that in a way that I don't think I would have been able to put out there. But yeah, but that gives you all kinds of cool impact though. So on the low end, you've got all of the cone area for both 6.5s playing, but then the coherency at the crossover between the mid and the tweeter is limited to that single point, and those frequencies as you get higher, they're closer together physically in time, so you don't
exactly,
get
yeah,
into issues. Yeah, that's really cool.
right.
um and that doesn't seem like it would be a feature that you'd find in a $350 unit, because I mean that's really cost aggressive. I mean, that's really inexpensive. That's
Right.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as opposed to the Kindle where you got to get a genuine wood veneer, and in this case, it's a vinyl veneer and things like that. They're just kind of cost savings
Right.
sort of aspects to it. But really what you get is a really full bandwidth, high performance loudspeaker that, just doesn't take advantage of some of those finer details, such as a cast woofer frame and things like that. So you can really get a good value, get a good product, good value for your money in that respect.
That's awesome. Yeah, and these are both bass reflex designs, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right on.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And they looks like they both have the included grill also, which is kind of cool.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm trying to look at the front. And those magnetic? It looks like they're magnetic grills.
Yes, that is the way all
That
loudspeakers should be.
Yeah,
I might add.
that's nice. Yeah, because some speakers at the lower end will still use the I don't know, post and socket
Yep.
attachment, and that's okay. But the magnetic grills are just such a nice touch. You just
Yes.
pop them on and off.
And it just
So
makes the front of the loudspeaker just less cluttered and things like that when there aren't a bunch of rubber grommets or pegs or things like that sticking out of the loudspeaker.
absolutely. You also sell a pair of bookshelf speakers,
Hmm.
the Albany 2s. Now, are these matched to the Kindles, or are they matched to the Concord, or are they something separate altogether?
I would say that they're probably uh, somewhat separate, just from the standpoint in that configuration, in a bookshelf configuration, even though the driver design and tweeter are consistent with its larger siblings. It's going to have a sound character that's more to its own. Of course, it's not going to have the deep, quite the deep bass extension, say, for example, the Concord's going to have, for example, of course.
Certainly.
Um, but, otherwise, it does have the same cosmetic design, shares the same cosmetic design as the Concord, for example.
Great. Okay, so outside of the home theater speakers and the Model 5, which I hope kind of issues in a new KLH era of speakers in that vein, because it would be
Yeah.
cool if that's just the start,
Right.
and there's more good stuff to come. Obviously, you got to test the market and make sure that's a good product that has demand. But
Right.
I love the look of that, and I would love to see more variations on a theme, I guess you might say.
Right. Well, we've thought out our roadmap, and of course, a roadmap is a bunch of ideas that you might do or you might not, sort
Hmm.
of thing. But yes, we have plenty of products in the roadmap that are kind of based on that Model 5 theme. We even have things in there, for example, that are just theater, you might like this, a theater version of the Model 5. I say that in a way that I,
Oh,
I would kind of characterize it more as a derivative product of the Model 5, so to speak, but for theater sort of applications that we're kind of looking at. So there's all these things that we can kind of imagine, but kind of until you just start putting pencil to paper and kind of start figuring all this stuff out and how it all works itself out, you're never quite sure what we're ultimately going to going to launch for a year from now, for example.
yeah, I could see something called the Model 18.
Well, this is
Maybe.
kind of it's kind of interesting that you say that because if you kind of look at a lot of KLH product history, there was a whole series of products that were in that
Uh-huh.
model series, of course, and quite a few of them were quite successful. There was a Model 9 that was electrostatic loudspeaker. I don't know if you're familiar with
I
that.
am not familiar with it, but I've heard of it. Yeah, I've never seen
Yeah,
one.
yeah. And then, of course, they had some table radios, a Model 8, a Model 21 that were very popular in the day. But, there was a Model 6, I remember that was very popular, Model 17, which is what you made reminded me of it when you mentioned the Model 18. But,
Right.
there were quite a few models in there that, in their heyday, they were very, very popular products. And of course, in some circles, even today, in those some of those
Hmm.
vintage websites, that's all they talk about, it seems like,
Right.
to this day.
So yeah, that's cool, and it's good to hear that these things are being considered for the future. So I would recommend that everybody go buy a set of Model 5s and experience that for yourself in your home, and that can just whet your appetite for what's to come, especially when they come out with the theater version of the Model 5 with
No, no
that's
pressure.
no pressure, that's even more full range. That'd be awesome. Oh, Carrie, I have to say thank you so much for joining us here today to let us know, a bit of history about KLH and, the current product mix. And I must say it's compelling. I think you have a really great story for
Mhm.
both two channel and home theater listeners, everything from, media rooms to, full blown kind of cinema rooms. Yeah,
Right.
you've got something for that. And we didn't even get to talk about the earbuds and headphones and all that other stuff.
No,
So
yeah, no, that's right.
yeah, people need to get on the website and go explore, because you guys have a wealth of different products out there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, just the earbuds, just real quick, are just interesting by themselves because they have native voice control.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
the earbuds themselves recognize 9 commands: play music, track forward, track back, volume up, volume down, sort of things, which is very cool. I mean, people really love it, and they really love it for for working out and things like that because
Hmm.
control is hands
Hands
free.
free.
Right? Yeah, it's all about that.
But I can picture this in months from now. I'll be on an airplane, and there's going to be somebody in front of me, and they're going to say volume up. And I'm going to, oh,
Yeah.
KLH.
You do feel a little silly when you're when you're around a lot of people and you do that.
Oh no, that's awesome. That's awesome. Great. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everybody's gotten some great information out of this. I know that I have, and I look forward to seeing you guys at Cedia later this year to check out all the products. And I hope you'll come and join us again whenever the next thing drops, and you can tell us all about it.
Absolutely, Giles. I enjoyed it. We can do
All
this
right.
anytime.
All right. Take care and thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.